welcome back to ChroniTalk. I'm your host, Mykayla Lynn, and today's episode is going to focus on the weight of invisible illness. So today I'm joined by Jen, and Jen is a chronic illness warrior herself, and we are going to be talking about primary immune deficiency as well as multiple other diagnoses that Jen has here, so a range of POTS and more. So we're going to let Jen dive into that, and we'll be talking about what it's like to live with those conditions, how they affect her day-to-day, and grab a tea, grab a coffee, whatever makes you kind of feel comfortable and grounded, and let's get into it. So hi Jen, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me on the podcast, and I'm just really pleased to be here.
We're going to just dive a little bit into Jen's story. So Jen, if you want to start at the beginning, life before your diagnosis to when you got your diagnosis and therefore after.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So, I was 25 when I received my diagnosis, and I spent my entire childhood and young adult life thinking that I was perfectly healthy and there was nothing wrong. And I was, a competitive gymnast and a high-achieving student and wanted to do all the things. And, I kept finding myself, especially as I got a little bit older, in situations where I was like running myself into the wall and getting really sick. And I just thought, oh, I'm just doing too much, or, I just got unlucky here. And then when I went off to college and I was living in dorms and living in sorority houses where everybody's on top of each other all the time, things really spiraled downhill quickly. As you can imagine, with primary immunodeficiency, all those germs and people living in close quarters were not very kind. So it was really at that point that I started looking for answers about what was going on. I was exhausted all the time. I was losing weight. I was always in and out of the hospital or the doctor's office or something with another ailment, another thing going on. And at the time, they really couldn't figure anything out. Even went so far as to do a lymph node biopsy to check for lymphomas my senior year of college because of these just chronic swollen lymph nodes all over. And when that came back negative, I kind of gave up for a while, went about my young adult life, but kind of kept holding myself back on professional opportunities because I was just never feeling well. I never had the energy to do it, and I didn't know when the next shoe was going to drop. And in that time frame, it took about 2 or 3 more years for me to start digging in again and really trying to figure out what was going on. At that point, I went pretty aggressively on the diagnostic journey, tests and specialists and talking to everybody I possibly could. And throughout the entire process from 18 years old until diagnosis, I had this primary care doctor who was, as I like to call him, my ride or die. He was there for the whole thing and just kept telling me, I don't know what this is, but we're gonna figure it out. Refer to one specialist, come up with no answers, refer to another, come up with no answers, and just keep going like that for about 2.5 years until we got this innocuous little immunology lab that kind of sent up a red flag of well, that's odd. Let's kind of pursue that and go down that path. The current immunologist, and I walked into her office, and never in my life has anybody said, I know exactly what's going on here. I know exactly what's wrong with you. And I was like, surely not. I'm getting my hopes up, And she was right. So it completely changed my life. I had to kind of wrap my brain around being chronically sick when I thought I was just this healthy pillar of a unstoppable force I had talked myself into in my teens, and kind of wrap my brain around needing to slow down, needing to take care of myself, that it wasn't necessarily a moral failing or anything that leads to this, that it's just kind of one of those things that sometimes happens to people. And from there, I got put on immunoglobulin therapy to treat my condition, and that was a process in and of itself. The United States healthcare system doesn't make it easy to get approved for very expensive therapies, and so I had an uphill battle with insurance to justify needing such an expensive therapy to keep me well and keep me alive and all of those things. I had denial letters from my insurance company saying we think you should have a life-threatening event before we try to treat you. Basically saying we think you should try dying first. I had to get a U.S. senator involved in the whole process. There were violations of federal law on how appeals were supposed to be handled in the whole process. It was quite the ordeal. But in the end, we won our appeals, and I started immunoglobulin therapy about 5 months after my initial diagnosis.
That's really heavy. I'm so happy that you did get your treatment. win out of it, but to like have to go back and forth and be fighting the insurance companies, never mind that, like it took 2.5 years to even get to that stage where you got the diagnosis. So that's really hard. I'm glad that you fought your way to the answers, because sometimes that's the only way, as you know best, is just to keep advocating for yourself.
Absolutely. I think that with chronic illness, maybe the biggest learning curve is that so much of it is just persistence. It's not that things can't get done, but it requires like superhuman persistence to get what you need.
And so when you talk a little bit about your journey into getting to your diagnosis, like how did that look in your personal life? Did you have supports there alongside of you? Were you working at the time? How was your life around that time?
So at the time I was working, and I was working with family where I kind of had a little bit more flexibility when I wasn't feeling well. But I had to keep working to keep my health insurance through all of that, and I was missing a ton of work. I mean, all of my paid time off was being used for sick leave, for doctor's appointments, because I so needed it. I was missing so much work. And I went years without being able to take a vacation because I was having to use all of my sick time. And I'm sorry, what was the other part of that question? The relationships,
That's okay. Yeah, like how was your support around that time?
It was, I would say, mixed. I think in hindsight, I realize now that what I thought was good support was really kind of lackluster compared to what I have now. You know, I had some friends and some family members that were incredibly supportive throughout all of it, but I was also at the time in a relationship that was not very healthy, and I think it would have been probably better to be on my own than be with that kind of personality at the time. But I definitely did have some ride or die friends, and I had a ride or die primary care. But definitely you get this feeling around you too of some of the people in your life that maybe think you're being dramatic, or that, that you're kind of making excuses for why you're not going to things, or why you're not at work, or this or that. And it's kind of a mixed bag. So I think sometimes it feels like the lack of support from some is what weighs on us the most heavily. But when things kind of start to clear and you kind of get your head around it, you see like the people who were the real ones in the whole process, and like had your back no matter what, because they show up in even bigger ways later on.
And it's nice that whole time you were able to still depend on one of the primary people being your doctor. So you had trust that somebody was at least listening and helping you advocate, which is so nice. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about your primary immunodeficiency diagnosis? Do you know a little bit more about that? We've done some episodes, so our listeners are pretty common in the common variable immune deficiency. So do you know what kind of umbrella term your primary immune deficiency would fall under?
Yeah, so I have an antibody deficiency very similar to kind of what they're already familiar with, and I don't make antibodies to certain pathogens, and I'm on a very similar line of treatment to those common variable immune deficiency folks with the immunoglobulin therapy as well.
Okay, so is yours genetic as well? Do you know if it comes down to genetics?
We've done genetic testing, but really didn't get any clear answers. So the best guess is that maybe there's some kind of multivariable genetic component, or that we just haven't found the right gene yet. So my testing results are out there in someone's hands, and if science progresses far enough to figure it out, hopefully I'll get a call one day saying that they know what it is.
Right. Okay, and can you share some of your other diagnoses with us? So you started out with trying to dig in because you weren't feeling well, and you got this primary immune deficiency diagnosis, but along came a lot more.
Yeah, so I think once I got into a good rhythm with the immunoglobulin and my PI symptoms were kind of at bay, it became a little more obvious that some other things were still unresolved. And it was about 6 months after I was feeling better on the immunoglobulin that I started realizing those POTS symptoms that I was having were probably not related to PI, and those symptoms had been so overwhelming that when those kind of eased up, it was easier to notice the other things that I had been juggling and kind of ignoring for a really long time. So I started dealing with a lot of lightheadedness and heart racing, and I was wearing watches all day long, catching heart rates that were just astronomical. And I live in South Louisiana, so we have extreme heat during the summer, like 100 degrees Fahrenheit heat indexes. And so, I would go outside and I wasn't sweating. I was overheating so fast and nearly passing out. And sometimes passing out, I was outside too long. And so at that point, I went back to my primary care and said, okay, this is a little unusual. That one was a lot faster to pick up on. I think by the time I had come to that, I had learned how to articulate what was going on a little bit better in pieces that they could digest and figure out a little bit easier what the story was behind the scenes. So about a month later, I had my POTS diagnosis. And from there, I think things had really unraveled pretty quickly. I don't know if it was stress. I don't know what it was. I mean, that was in the height of the early days of the COVID pandemic when everybody was at home, and that was headline all day long everywhere you looked. And so the idiopathic hives kind of started rearing their head around the same time. I was getting out of showers, breaking out in hives, going on walks, breaking out in hives, eating the same diet I had eaten for years. So we kind of knew it doesn't really seem to be a new food allergy. There doesn't really seem to be a trend there. And we did some testing with the same doctor that treats my immunodeficiencies, and she works in allergy immunology. Started on some meds for that too, and shortly after I had a spontaneous CSF leak. This all happened, I think the POTS diagnosis to the spontaneous CSF leak and the chronic idiopathic urticaria, that all happened within like a 6-month window. From around July of 2020 to December 2020. And the spontaneous CSF leak had me in bed rest for a month, and then an immediate referral for evaluation for hypermobility disorder, because that's kind of one of the red flags for something like that. So, that 2020, last half of 2020 to the early part of 2021 was a whirlwind, where it was in and out of doctors' offices and hospitals all the time, nonstop testing, and everything just seemed to kind of snowball on top of one another. And from there, I would say it probably took another 6 months from getting all of these new diagnoses to kind of getting them under control.
Yeah, so I believe like the statistic behind people finding like chronic illnesses, especially like invisible chronic illnesses, is an average of like 5 years of this back and forth and advocating for yourself and the multiple doctors like you explain, or getting a referral to a specialist that comes back, okay, that's nothing. Even myself, I know I've been through that too. Like, you go to a specialist and you hear, okay, that's nothing, there's nothing here, and it's like, okay, well, there is something, so you must not be the specialist that I need to be seeing.
Yes, that I think is one of the most frustrating things to hear when you're not feeling well and all the tests are coming back quote unquote normal, and somebody's telling you, well, there's nothing wrong, but you feel it deep in your gut. Like, I shouldn't be feeling this way. This is not normal. But it's so validating when you hear the ones that do respond with, okay, these labs are normal and this is not what's wrong with you, but we need to get you to somebody else. And I think it's underestimated like how much that difference in wording really makes, because I think otherwise you start to feel like you're going crazy, like you're losing your mind, like I did. I can't speak for anybody else. I felt like I was losing my mind hearing, oh, this is normal, that's normal, there's nothing wrong here. It's like, I started guessing if I was making it up. It was so validating.
Where I'm at.
Yeah,
I feel like crazy sometimes, and like I know myself, I've reached out to some people in the chronic illness like community for extra support and stuff, and I feel like you've probably done the same because you've built yourself a little community as well.
Yeah, so I think the night and day difference from before I built this little community that I found on Instagram and online versus now, I think now I've just seen so many people go through similar things and then find the answer. Just that in and of itself is reassuring to know that it happens. We will find the answer.
And everybody's journey looks different, right? Like yours could take 6 years and the next person's could take 6 months. Like everyone's journey is so different.
Yeah, and then I've met some people in our community who went into their 50s and 60s before they were finally diagnosed. They went decades. So the variation is definitely there, and everybody's experience is going to be so drastically different. People learning to trust their gut instinct on how they're feeling and just being persistent is definitely the key.
I totally agree. And finding the right communities, the right supports, like I don't think that I would have learned half of what I learned or to advocate for myself the way that I do, or I mean, just so much, especially in the PI community. I made a little post out there to everybody. So happy Easter. We are just coming off of the Easter weekend. Happy Easter to everybody who celebrates. And I didn't put out an episode because honestly, I spent more time with my family and friends because I was going through it. Like I got my plasma taken away. I went from last episode telling my community here, like, you know, my plasma is being taken away, and then I chuckled and I was like, oh, it's not being taken away. Like what I mean is they're giving me a break because my body is reacting really poorly with adverse side effects. But that chuckle was, I guess that really turned into reality. They have now taken away my treatment instead of like trying a different alternative. And I'm not going to sit here and shame any doctors. Maybe there's a bigger alternative plan here. I've sent in a list of questions, but it left myself very confused and overwhelmed, and just right back to exactly what we were saying, like seeking out more support, seeking out some comfort in this time, knowing that I am not crazy. I do have this diagnosis, regardless of them taking away my plasma. I still have a primary immune deficiency. I still have hypogammaglobulinemia. I still have a TACI deficiency. These things don't change. But no matter what, we can get very overwhelmed. Like with the second diagnosis, the third, like whatever it may be that adds that extra layer for us, it can just really like kind of make us just like need a second. And that's honestly what I needed last week.
100%. I totally agree with that. I think we all hit those like roadblocks where it's like, I need a break from whatever's going on because it does get so overwhelming. I can remember during that phase where I was like in and out of the hospital all the time, getting like multiple new diagnoses in the span of 6 months. I was so burnt out on seeing doctors that I would just like, I would come home and sob at how over I was being in a doctor's office, even though I knew I needed to be there, and there were such debilitating symptoms going on at the time. And I can really empathize with having your plasma taken away. I think that's been the big dark cloud of fear that I have going, you know, just knowing how well I feel on it, just that fear of like having it taken away. I think that's a very thing to be upset about and kind of need to take a step back for.
Totally. And it happens actually a lot more, like I feel like for you guys in the States than it does for a lot of us in Canada, because of the insurance problems that we previously have spoken on, like getting things approved or making sure that you have enough coverage, because if you don't, it can be upwards of $10,000-$20,000 a month. But in Canada, like we still, regardless of it being covered, like this is still an insurance issue at the end of the day. Like he's trying to label it, you know, on the mild side and whatever, so that I don't need it. And essentially this does come down to cost issues. And I mean, that's my opinion and only opinion. Right back to the statement of like, this is not a medical podcast. I'm not here to give medical advice, but this is my journey. And I know for a lot of you in the States, your journey comes down to the price as well.
All the time. And, you know, every time you switch insurance or anything, you switch a job, you get married, you have to go through that prior authorization process all over again. I know when I got married and got on my husband's insurance, I think they dragged out the authorization for like 2 months. And man, it was hitting me by like 6 weeks in, 4 weeks in, like really not having another dose. I was dragging, I was sick, I was exhausted, and that was just a temporary pause. So yeah, it's a very real concern every time something changes, every time there's a new insurance change, or, you know, if something changes in the criteria for your health system or your health insurance, whatever it is that somebody has in their country that's making these decisions, there's always that fear that it's going to go away.
Yeah, and I mean, like, our guidelines are different too, right? Like, a lot of the support groups, like, people are over 1,000 for trough levels, and here in Canada, like, me cruising at 800-900, he's just good with that. Like, he will absolutely not even try to, like, get me over 1,000, versus people in the States, like, don't want to see someone under 1,000. So the guidelines that we have are very different. You know, the prerequisitions, I guess, to qualify you for having that diagnosis is also different here. So like I said, like, he is trying to paint it as, I guess, well, in his words exactly, I'll lay it out for you, that you are on the more mild side of primary immune deficiency. So we're going to see how it goes, and we're just going to take you off plasma and see how your body responds. So if that gives a little bit of an insight to some of our listeners, well, we don't just see how it goes with primary immune deficiency. I want to highlight that. Jen would know that best. We don't just let our bodies go. So yeah, I mean, like, it can be very challenging in some of those scenarios where you're like, how do I navigate this? How do I move forward? But really taking a second, like I said before, to just sit there with it for a moment, because my initial is like pure anger, like, what are you doing? But on the phone, pure shock. Like, he's like, do you have any questions? And I'm like, nope, hang up, because I'm in shock, right? Like, I do have questions. So take a second, collect yourself, gather those questions. And then I sent it to the clinic and I said, I would like these answered at your earliest convenience, because I'm still allowed to advocate for myself regardless of the fact that I was in shock and said I don't have any questions.
Absolutely. I mean, I think taking that minute helps you get the clarity of mind to like figure out the next steps too. Like, not just to come to terms with it emotionally, but also just from a logistics standpoint. Like, okay, where do I go next? Who do I ask next? What's the next question? Are there alternatives? And kind of putting those pieces together, having that moment to wrap your brain around, okay, what did somebody just tell me?
Right.
I think that's so important. And having the clarity of mind to do it in a way that you're going to get answers, because that initial emotional response, you know, the fear, the rage, the frustration, as valid as those feelings are, responding in that way to ask the questions a lot of times kind of sets us back a little bit, or makes it harder to get information. And yeah, I think taking that step in that moment to just like breathe, absorb the information, figure out what's going on, it's so essential. I think you absolutely did the right thing to take that time for yourself.
And what's some of the things that like you do for yourself throughout all of this? Like, what are some hobbies, some things you like to do, or things like just taking a moment and like collecting your thoughts? Like, what do you do to help yourself?
Well, so a lot of the time I've really enjoyed baking. I find the precision, the monotony, and like what you're doing to be really soothing, and give my brain a chance to, like, even though I'm focused on something because I'm following like my recipe or whatever I'm doing, there's another part of my brain that's like operating in the background, like absorbing information, thinking about whatever else is going on. I went through a phase like right after the pandemic started, when everybody was like stuck at home, and then through like all of my new diagnoses, where I was baking all the time. I think there was times where I made like 8 or 10 dozen cupcakes in a day, just like, it's like trauma baking.
I mean, I love that. I also trauma bake.
It's one of the most soothing hobbies I can imagine. Lately, my husband and I have started a little garden in our backyard. She's too young to really like dig her hands in and help. She's only 11 months, but she loves going outside to check on her plants every day, and like gets the biggest grin on her face when we pick something off of it.
That's so sweet.
That gardening lately has been really soothing to the soul, just like going out there, checking on it, giving it the water, taking her out and seeing her smile. And so that's kind of, I think, maybe taken over for right now over the baking. It's really hard to bake with an 11-month-old like following you around everywhere in the kitchen, like trying to open all the cabinets and pull everything out. That hobby's on the back burner for a little bit.
All right, so let's touch on that too. So Jen has an 11-month-old. So let's dive a little bit into that. And I mean, navigating life with a chronic illness, having a baby, anything that you got through that time, any diagnosis you got because you had the baby, all of it. Like, just dive in.
Sometimes I think it's a taboo topic almost to talk about when you're like deciding to have a child while you already know that you have a chronic illness, especially one that could potentially be genetic. So I'm really happy to have the opportunity to speak about that, because I feel like I had such little guidance on making this decision.
Like I told Jen that I was bringing her on today to also highlight this, because I myself am 24, don't know if I'm having kids, but this is something that will forever play in my mind. Jen, is do you have a child when you already know? So I love that, and let's go.
I think, so I come from maybe a little bit of a more privileged like decision-making process side. When I talk about like my husband and I, he's a physician. He specifically does have training in immunology. So he's already well educated on the topic. So when we started having that conversation, like I had an educated support person to make that decision with. But we went through our due diligence. We met with maternal fetal medicine, which is like the high risk OBGYNs, to just go over like my diagnoses and make sure that there weren't any major concerns with either genetic conditions that would like for sure be inherited or passed on that would be a problem, or with conditions that would maybe cause severe issues in pregnancy or delivery. And we got the green flag from maternal fetal medicine. I think I mentioned earlier that like I've done genetic testing in the past, but with kind of unclear results. And because there was some pretty unclear results, and like no known inheritance pattern, nobody else in my family that has this except for me. We were pretty confident in conversations with them and with genetics and with my immunologist that the risk of passing my condition on was low, but it was certainly there. So from there, we just had to ask ourselves kind of a black and white question. Like, do I have quality of life? Yes, I do. I have, you know, people that I love and things that I'm able to do and enjoy my life despite having some chronic illnesses. And I asked myself, if I passed on every single one of my conditions to my child, would they have quality of life? And if the answer is yes, then we'll move forward. And I'm pretty biased, but I think I'm living a pretty good life right now. There's certainly challenges, but I wouldn't say it wasn't worth it to be here. So we made the decision to try, and I think a lot of the ifs in the back of my mind with pregnancy complications were, you know, immunodeficiency related and infections that could cause problems and things like that. Your immune system is more suppressed when you're pregnant than usual, just at baseline. So I certainly had concerns over that, and we were monitoring it incredibly closely, running labs to check levels and things like that to watch out for dips before they became an issue. Surprisingly, my levels stayed pretty consistent. I hit one rough stretch where I had COVID and the flu back to back. Not working at the time, so I was able to really rest and take back my mind that I was going to have all these complications. And from a safety standpoint, everything was fine, but I won't say it was easy. With a hypermobility disorder, your joints are really lax at baseline, and pregnancy hormones increase the laxity in your joints. So I was having a lot of hip pain and what they call round ligament pain, sciatic nerve pain, and pretty much every possible pain you could have from adding an extra human into your body and stretching your joints and ligaments. And so I was hurting all the time. So I think on the outside, I looked like I was having this like glowing, beautiful pregnancy because, you know, my legs weren't swollen and I wasn't, you know, putting on quote unquote too much weight or whatever things people look at and say, oh, that's a hard pregnancy. But everywhere I went, I was in constant pain, and people just kept telling me, oh, you're wearing pregnancy so well. And I wanted to punch them. I was like, oh, this sucks. But yeah, I made it through all the way to the third trimester without any major complications, just a lot of discomfort. And it was right at 37 weeks that I was having some like contractions, and we went into the hospital and they took my blood pressure, and my blood pressure was elevated. And I had been monitoring it the whole time. And I thought, the first thing I could think in my head of like all the things that could have gone wrong with my conditions that I do have, this was not on my bingo card for like elevated blood pressure. So they admitted me, they induced me that night. And I had my dolly, but you know, they were watching the blood pressure and all of those things. And yeah, I got a diagnosis of gestational hypertension for elevated blood pressure during pregnancy. It came down while I was in the hospital recovering, and we went home thinking everything was fine and over. And then about a week and a half or so later, we were doing routine blood pressure checks again, and just to make sure everything was fine. And sure enough, postpartum hypertension, and I had to get on some blood pressure meds. But that resolved itself by 6-week follow-ups with my doctor, and yeah, everything went pretty smoothly from there otherwise, but it was certainly a bit of a shock thinking, okay, I've thought of all the things and I've talked to all the doctors to plan for this, and then, you know, something that was just not related to any of my conditions, and then, you know, a new little hurdle popped up, but it's been worth it. It was
Which I mean can happen
easy
to anybody, right? Like you could be the healthiest of the healthiest people, and you could still have a child who has X, Y, and Z. Like it doesn't exactly mean that just because you know what you have that you know what your child's going to have. And like in your case, you know, it's great that there's no genetic component kind of known at that point, so that you can make a little bit of an educated decision to be like, okay, well maybe we won't pass that on. And it can be good on the, if you do know as well, because I myself know that it is a genetic portion. My mom and I both carry it, but what we can do is go get like pre-genetic testing done for my spouse, and then if his genes don't poorly complement my poor genes essentially, then the risk would be much lower, and I would be in Jen's scenario where you're saying, okay, we know we have the risk, but the risk is on the lower side. Now Jen, if the risk was on the high side, did you guys talk about what that could have looked like?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it still boiled down really to that question in our heads of like, if this child has all of my conditions, do they have quality of life? Because like you said, even people who are perfectly healthy and have no conditions known between both parents, they can have a severely sick child. That's the risk you take when you have a child at all, much less, if you have a chronic condition. And so I said, okay, well, we have knowns here, things that we know are possible. And if those things come to fruition, can I live with that? And the answer is yes. Maybe that's a controversial take for some people, but I think the people that would feel that way are probably those that don't walk in our shoes and don't have our condition, to see that there is a lot of quality of life. I think people see a chronic illness diagnosis as like a life-ending, like you'll never do anything kind of thing, but we still travel. We have friends that we see and visit with, and family that we love, and we have a lot of things in our life that bring us joy and quality and great experience, and that's what it's supposed to be about.
For sure.
And we're just
I think we get to enjoy our life.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, we get to enjoy our life like the same as anybody else, just with like boundaries on top, with lines on top, right? Like we're just not living the exact same path, and that's okay.
Yeah, we have a little asterisk for like the extra prep we maybe need to do to have our meds for us or whatever, but or the extra time for rest, but what's wrong with that, And I don't know, we just do the best with the cards we're dealt, and that's everybody, everybody's doing that. And, our challenges might be a diagnosis, but somebody else's might be totally different, And we're coming from a place where we know what we're looking for at least. So if she ever does show signs of any of these conditions, then we know exactly where to take her to get care.
And you know the process now, and you would know how to help her and how to be there for her. So I mean, she would have one of the best advocates next to her side, which is awesome. Did you find it challenging at all, like to get your treatments done while while raising a newborn, all of the things? Like how often is your treatment? I guess we didn't start there.
Yeah, so I'm on weekly sub-Q, and I will say having a newborn and doing my sub-Q routine is definitely a bigger challenge than it was before having a baby, because they don't know that you need to sleep it off that night and get some rest after your treatment. They just wake up when they feel like waking up. And I think especially because we made the decision to do breastfeeding, and so I'm her exclusive source of food for the first year. It kind of threw in some extra wrenches and a little more difficulty recovering from immunoglobulin, maybe a little bit more advanced planning for the infusion nights. And in those early days, especially when the care is really a little more difficult, we had to make sure that my husband had some backup if he needed an extra hand doing things, and having my mom or somebody come help if needed. But he was doing everything he could to try to make sure that I got some rest and did what I needed to do aside from the breastfeeding needs. Unfortunately, he couldn't take that one thing off my hands.
Yeah, right? It's so nice that you had the support, but I have multiple friends that had or are breastfeeding, and that itself is hard enough to juggle, balance, do, and not be tired from. And then you're adding a chronic illness treatment that literally makes you exhausted and fatigued on top. So that's quite hard, and you don't get to just wake up and say, no, I don't think you're hungry right now.
Yes. Or no, somebody else can just mix a bottle together.
Right.
But I think because of the slight risk that she would have had an immune deficiency, I was so gung-ho that I wanted her to have the antibody support from the breast milk that I really talked myself into doing it. And then I got into a routine with it, and now it's all right, well, we're almost done at this point, so I might as well just keep going. And I've just kept talking myself into doing it.
no disregard to anybody who can't breastfeed, but like awesome
Oh.
educational forward thinking there between you and your husband to be like, you know, if we already know that this could be predisposed and then we do know the benefits of breastfeeding, good for you for trying, regardless of if that worked out or not. You tried.
Yeah, I mean, it was nice having the support that I had where I wasn't working for the first 8 months, so I was really able to focus on like being in that routine,
Yeah.
in the right headspace to keep doing it. You know, especially for moms that have to rush back to work. I have no idea how they manage to do that.
Oh,
There's
no.
no way. I think I would have survived breastfeeding if I had been rushing back to work, 4 weeks or 6 weeks after the birth. And definitely no disrespect to any moms that are not doing it, because
Yeah.
it is
hard.
a full-time job and it is exhausting. And
Totally. Even without
Yeah.
breastfeeding, I mean, we know that raising a kid is a full-time job. And that being said, you're back to full-time work now, or part-time work, some work of some sort?
I am back to full-time work now. I went back the same day my daughter made 8 months. I
Oh.
was not intending to. I had taken a step back from working full-time to take care of my health while, planning to get pregnant, and while I was pregnant and with our baby, and the intention was really just for me to keep taking care of myself. But I got an opportunity that was too good to pass up, and I asked for every accommodation I could possibly think of that would be helpful to make sure I wasn't, getting sick all the time, and make sure that I was in a space where I could keep taking care of myself the way I knew I needed to. I think now I have enough experience living with these conditions that I really know what I need to succeed, which really helped to go into an interview and say, this is, if you guys want to hire me, this is what I need. And they said yes to everything. So at that point,
I
was
love
kind of
that you
like,
were open and honest with them, because when I was looking for a job like a few months ago, I had family and friends, not all, but some, say like, maybe you just shouldn't tell them, like neglect that information. And I said like, no, that's not going to work for me. If you don't accept this, like I'm unwilling to work for your company, because I did have a manager in the past who literally didn't let me take an extra 15 minutes on my break to go pick up my plasma from the hospital. And so if these things can't be met for me, like I can't meet your requirements, and I'm a really hard worker, so I know what I'm going to bring to the table, and I need that to be matched with, you understand that there's a chronic illness here, and I'm not asking to, have all the accommodations in the world. You're just asking to have the accommodations that you need to make you succeed in that position, right?
Exactly. And I think that same line of thinking, it applies to jobs, it applies to the relationships that we have in our life.
Yeah.
It's a double-edged sword to say, well, I'm going to hold back this information because maybe it's going to scare somebody off. At the end of the day, for those relationships, those environments, those jobs to work out for us, I think it's really helpful to be very clear and upfront, and to reject the spaces that we can see are not going to be understanding. Not asking people to bend over backwards for every little thing, but for reasonable accommodations, for reasonable acceptance. And to not be afraid to say, I'm going to take this job and I'm going to work really hard for you. These are just the things I need to do that. Or, to say like, I have a lot to bring to a relationship or a friendship, a lot of really great qualities as a person, but I also have this thing, and sometimes I'm going to have to cancel plans, or sometimes I'm just going to be tired and need to rest, or I'm going to have doctor's appointments or treatments to do. But I think we really make space for our lives to blossom the way we want, and maybe the way we need, when we allow ourselves to be a little bit more forward about what our lives are like.
I agree. Yeah, I like that concept of thinking to apply that to a whole, like being open and honest and advocating, doing all of the things is really what's going to push you forward in this kind of journey and community, and be able to like really amplify your voice and help amplify other people's, while still making the reasonable accommodations and having the friendships and the relationships and everything that we all want, and we want to succeed. We just need the right platform to do so.
Absolutely. I think, there's certainly still stigma around chronic illness. There's stigma around disability. And the only way to start breaking that up is for some of us to say, I'm not going to hide it. There's nothing to be ashamed about. It's not anything that, we did wrong, quote unquote. It's just the luck of the draw. And so hiding back from that, from sharing that information, I think while it's a natural reaction and it's a socially driven idea that's like that I think a lot of people feel is necessary. I think it kind of holds us back in embracing our ability, our life, what we can have and what we want to have, and making space for others to do so behind us. I always, in the back of my mind, say, well, I want to make it easier for the next person behind me. And part of doing that is helping to break the stigma around it and saying, okay, I'm not going to hide from this employer. If they want to hire me, they'll hire me. And if not, I'll find somebody else. Or
Exactly.
if I'm dating this person and they don't accept that, I have a chronic illness or that's something that they hold over my head, then I don't need this. I'll find somebody that is not bothered by it and sees and the entire rest of the person. And not just the diagnosis on their medical records. So yeah, I think in doing so, like, we just are slowly but surely chipping away at that stigma to hopefully make it easier.
I agree, and that's definitely like why I opened this space, is just to try to kind of help double down on the next person and try to help amplify their voice. And like, I have a website coming, so I'm gonna have a clothing line coming and a bunch of stuff for chronic illnesses, disabilities, like just a bunch. I'm super excited about it, but what it is it's like partnering with small businesses to get them out. So I'm applying that in every portion of this concept. I want this space for you all to be able to openly talk and be able to advocate and do all the things, share your stories, so that you're doubling it down. The next person is like, wow, I learned X, Y, and Z, and that really helped me. And I mean, I'm still learning stuff too, even just by having conversations with people, which I think is so helpful. But with like the clothing brand and all of it, I just think that it would be really nice to like help get small businesses out on the same token. Like, we want funny shirts to wear and we want to help advocate, and I would love to just wear like a shirt or a hoodie or something. This like scrunchy headband set, we're gonna have like a chronic illness themed one. This is Easter themed, so I'm gonna get close to the camera.
That's so cute.
So we're gonna have a chronic illness one, so super cute. So like, in doing that, I'm kind of handpicking like other people that I want to help amplify, their voice. And that doesn't just come down to only the people in this community, because people outside of our community can help us do things like getting our voice out there as well.
Absolutely. I love that you're doing that. I love that you're helping small businesses getting out there, and those partnerships are going to be what helps us when we need help with something. If we need to advocate for something, if we need to get awareness out for something, raise money for something, it all really takes off when people know your story, when they know what's going on, because they've already been prepping themselves mentally to step in. And so when they know, then when something happens, we can really go to that community and say, okay, this is what we need help with. And I love that you're doing that, and I love that you started this podcast. I mean, when I was first diagnosed, I scoured the internet for anything, living with antibody deficiencies and primary immunodeficiency, and I couldn't find any books, I couldn't find blogs, I couldn't find podcasts. I looked everywhere, and that was actually part of the reason that I started my own community, is because I couldn't find anything. So seeing more and more pop up over the last several years has been so exciting, because we know that, somebody's going to get that diagnosis and they're going to start that Google search. And unlike when we started and there was nothing to find, nobody to connect with, they're going to find your podcast or some Instagram accounts or other things that like make them feel seen.
I hope so.
That's exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, and like, I definitely wanted to open this space to more than just myself, just yourself. Like primary immune deficiency, there was not enough education or resources or support around, but I still feel the same about disabilities. I still feel the same about mental health, like all of it, everything that comes in between, regardless of what we do and do not have out there. I don't think that there's enough. I don't think that we're far enough in digging into that advocation and amplifying each other's voices. And my uncle has been a paraplegic since, well, my whole life, but since he was like 16. So he will be on here telling a very lengthy story. It might be a two-parter. It's gonna be super cool, because it's like that is a majority of like where I have learned so much, and so much advocation and like building connections and everything, that I'm really like looking forward to sharing different sides of this as well. But like you said, to have that, like, somebody can look up CVID at this point, and maybe I'll fall in that search for them, and your story will come up, or Aubrey's, or anybody's. Like, I'm excited for that, because in Aubrey's story, in Katie's story, in yours, in mine, they're all different. We have different advice to give, different coping mechanisms, and I just hope that it helps at least one person, you know?
Yeah, I think any of us that have gotten into this community building experience online, we all have in the back of our heads, like, if it helps one person feel less alone than we did, then it's worth it. And I've had moments where I've been moved to tears by somebody reaching out and saying, like, I've never met anybody else with this condition. And that's why I'll keep doing it, you know? And that's why you will keep doing it, because that's going to happen. And slowly but surely, more of us will be connected and online and present, and people are going to get these diagnoses and immediately find this community of people that they can connect with, and they're not going to feel like their world is, like, completely turned upside down quite as much. You know, they're going to have people that can tell them.
The education and resources too, like, even on your platform. So just for our listeners, you can find Jen at Chronic Jen. So you can find her on Instagram there and connect with her as well if you have any questions, you want to further talk about her story or just follow along, because even on Jen's Instagram too, you know, she shares very educational stuff and tries to really open up another community there too. And so I think any point somebody's listening to this and they're like, wow, like, I really resonate in that story because she has an antibody deficiency and doesn't quite know where her genetics lie, which is a little bit different than the last story, then awesome, reach out, because we want to hear from you guys. We want to be able to feel like we're that extra layer of support that we didn't have at the time, right?
Absolutely. And I think I've had people, like, send me messages before, being like, I'm so sorry to bother you, can I ask a question? And I'm like, oh my god, I'm an open book, like, what do you want to know? I'll tell you everything. So never be afraid to send us messages and ask or reach out to say, hey, I was just newly diagnosed, you know, I'm starting subcutaneous immunoglobulin or, you know, IVIG, and I have no idea what to expect, because almost 100% of the time, probably 100% that are visible on those platforms, we are going to respond when we can, and be happy to give insight or share some of our story, or just be an ear to say, like, I totally get where you're at right now, this is a lot to take in, and, you know, it gets better
Totally.
from here.
Yeah, and I get lots of messages that don't even pertain to primary immunodeficiency necessarily, and I am always open to hearing, listening, and sharing just a variety of stories, struggles, like, be the ear, be the shoulder, whatever. Like, we're all in the same community regardless. We all want each other to feel heard and seen.
Absolutely. Like, it might be different details in our journeys,
right?
But I think it's fair to say we can all empathize with how difficult it can be. So yeah, 100%. Like, you don't have to have the same diagnosis or list of diagnoses or be in the same phase of life at all to say, hey, this is hard, can I talk to you? Or I'm new to this, or whatever.
Yeah,
you know.
100%. Is there anything that you feel like you still want to share with our listeners at this point, or any piece of advice or something that you feel would be great for them?
The biggest piece of advice that I wish I'd known when I started, and that you kind of learn the hard way, I think, is just that persistence is what gets results. When you're trying to get diagnosed, when you're trying to get on treatment, get an insurance approval, you know, it can be really discouraging when someone says, there's nothing going on, or we're going to deny this, or, you know, we don't think there's anything wrong with you, or just whatever it is. If you feel that something's wrong, trust your gut and be persistent, because the statistics favor that, right? The statistics on diagnoses, on insurance appeals getting overturned, on all sorts of things. The statistics
on how long it
takes.
Absolutely. Like I said, it takes so long, and that's a statistic that's shared out there. We know it takes a long time. We know you need to be persistent.
Absolutely. So just remember that the statistics are in your favor, and keep pushing, be persistent, and don't let anybody scare you away from being honest and true to yourself about what's going on. I think, like, living and embracing it fully, where you're not afraid to share that information, you'll be surprised at how much it opens up in your life that you can really enjoy. It's a career path, whether it's a relationship, friendships, anything. I think you'll start to see that when you start sharing, it opens doors that you didn't know would be there.
Yeah, I love that. I agree. As our parents and grandparents used to say, like the old saying of the squeaky wheel gets the grease, maybe just apply that a little harder because the squeaky wheel sometimes does get the grease. So just keep pushing because eventually they will listen. They will give you the treatment that you need. Jen, thank you so much for sharing your story today. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun to get to chat with another fellow PI warrior.
Right, and Jen also is a big advocate as well for sharing information regarding the Immune Deficiency Foundation. So I am also going to double down on that like a last episode, like every episode. If you have a primary immune deficiency, do not hesitate to reach out to or look on the website for more information and resources regarding primary immune deficiency. The IDF shares updates really religiously, like if there's anything changing, they'll hold a meeting. And as I said, at Chronic Jen is where you'll find Jen, and she'll even share multiple of those things if she finds it as well. So sometimes if you feel like, I'm missing a lot of those meetings, hop over to a fellow PI warrior here and be like, okay, I'm gonna follow them so I have a little bit more coming up in my news feed to warn me when these IDF conferences and such are. When the IDF does hold their big conference, it is one of the most educational things, and I'm always gonna say definitely look into that. There are scholarships. I myself was one that received one even in Canada. So super cool. Thank you, Jen, for everything that you share and everything that you also shared here today. Your honesty, your strength, the vulnerability, being open and sharing everything in between for us. I appreciate it all, and this is exactly why ChroniTalk exists, is to highlight people in diagnosis and conditions just like this, and to really emphasize that this is our real lives. This is exactly what we are dealing with, and we want to be heard. So if today's episode resonated with you, please make sure to share it with a friend, leave a review or a message, and follow me at ChroniTalk on the socials. So I'm pretty much everywhere, guys. We've got the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Audible. I'll have it on YouTube hopefully by the end of this week. Like I said, the podcast website will be launching soon. And I will have a Patreon and the whole 9 yards. So really just keep an eye out for everything. And to anybody struggling, you're not alone. Your pain is valid, and there's a whole community here who gets it. So until next time, be kind to yourself. Keep the conversation going.